government, which obliges everyone, and reason, which is that law, teaches all mankind who will but consult it, that all being equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. That's the law of nature. That's the law of nature that our founders were talking about when they wrote the law of nature and nature's God into the Declaration of Independence. Because we know Jefferson drafted it, and he's telling us he was a big Locke fan. In fact, if you go through all of his letters, I got a big, thick book full of his letters, he says on many occasions that he thought Locke, Bacon, and Newton were the greatest men who ever lived. And he got so fussy about it when he got old and a little funny that he had this picture made of him. And he had all of them put into the picture frame, and he wrote this letter to this guy telling him how you make it up so that after I'm dead, if people try to split the pictures up, they won't be able to do it without ruining them all. It's pretty nutty, but there's my. I mean, go read it for yourself. Locke was it for him as far as politics, and of course he loved Newton for science and Bacon for philosophy. So this is what the meaning of the words to me. To me, I don't like the term constitutional rights. I don't go so far as to correct it because I don't consider myself an authority. I like the term constitutional protections of our natural rights, because our rights, and I'll quote Barack Obama, the first one to do it at one of your meetings, I would bet. He said during his inaugural address, in America, we believe that our rights come from our maker, not from our government. He went on to contradict that statement about 82 times after he said it, but he started his speech, very well. I was cheering. Only got to cheer for about a minute and a half.
Ask him who's the maker, though.
Yeah, well, who knows? But in any case, but what he was saying is, what is our founding principle is that we have rights that precede the government. And in fact, I've got one near the end where John Adams says, I say rights, for such they have, undoubtedly antecedent to all earthly government, rights that cannot be repealed or restrained by human laws, rights derived from the great legislator of the universe. Same thing as Barack Obama said. So, this is an important thing I think we have to get across to people, that, and what we've been plagued by, and I would argue over the last century, is unfettered democracy. Because if we all get together and vote, it doesn't matter, whose rights we violate. It's the law. We voted, our guy won, and we're going to do it, no matter what it is. And that's what we're experiencing right now. And of course, it's getting more and more violent. You've got two competing, what I would say, criminal gangs that say, okay, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and half of the country says, oh, no, you're not, and they're all out protesting, and they win by 1%, and it doesn't matter what those other 49% think. Okay, now we just had this, now the other group is in, now they've won, and it doesn't matter what the other side thinks. And I would argue that the people that are sticking with the platforms of those two parties, that they don't know what they're trying to do. They just know our guys are for something I'm for, and if they told us that we should all stay locked in our house 24 hours a day, I'm for it as long as my guy says it, or gal. So that's the problem that we have, and it's not a new problem. It is an old problem. In fact, I would say it's the oldest problem in history. It starts with maybe the first city. I'm going to give some examples. But before we move on, I want to ask, does anyone here consider themselves a libertarian? I like to always ask, who's
libertarian? A little bit.
Yeah. I don't mean the party, but philosophy. Yeah. Everybody? Nobody? Anybody a liberal the way we define it today? No. Conservative?
Classical liberal.
Classical liberal? Conservative? Conservative?
Basically libertarian.
I guess, people call me a libertarian. I just say, this is my thing. That's the libertarians. As long as they do it, then that's what I believe. The reason I ask is because the libertarians' foundational principle is the non-aggression principle, right? They say that we apply the non-aggression principle, the right of everyone to do whatever they please as long as they don't violate the rights of anyone else. Well, I would say that our country was founded upon what we today call the sterile 20th 20th century, almost clinical name, the non-aggression principle. That is the liberty. That's what it is. That's Locke, Jefferson. In fact, I don't think I put it in here, but I know I put it in here. Jefferson said, and I'll quote him again, "Our legislators are not sufficiently apprised of the rightful limits of their powers, that their true office is only to declare and enforce our natural rights and duties, to take none of them from us. No one has a natural right to commit aggression on the equal rights of another, and this is all from which the laws ought to restrain him." So that could be off the Libertarian Party website, right? It's the non-aggression principle as we know it. That is the definition of liberty. That's another part of my argument. And liberty is one of the three of the basic rights that cannot be infringed. They're natural. They can't be voted away. Okay, they can't be written into a constitution and violated that way. They precede all constitutions. They come from us. And life and liberty. And the third one is the one that is the big problem, I would argue, throughout history. Because human beings do not naturally aggress against each other's life or liberty for the most part. I mean, excluding the Jeffrey Dahmers out there that have got someone's kidneys in their refrigerator or whatever. But for the most part, human conflict occurs over what? Property. Somebody wants somebody else's. And that, according to Locke and our founders, is the definition of the state of war we're talking about, which is to bring force against another person, most often to take away their property. And, of course, if you just go out and do it as an individual, we recognize it as a crime. But all throughout history, people have attempted to do the same thing using some form of civil government, whether it's a democracy, a representative republic, and if you go back, I'll go back to Dr. Locke again, and some people criticize it. I go to him too much, but I always say that, if you really want to convince people fast, the only thing they have to read is Locke's second treatise, which is this on the original extent, blah, 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 civil government, because everything's in there. And he says, and this is a very unqualified statement, it's quite shocking to some people, "The great and chief end, therefore, of men's uniting into commonwealths and putting themselves under government is the preservation of their property." No more, nothing about health care or anything else in there, low unemployment, nothing. Preservation of their property, which is an extraordinary thing for him to say. He wasn't the first one to say it because someone mentioned Cicero. Cicero said, "For the chief purpose in the establishment of constitutional state and municipal governments was that individual property rights might be secured. For although it was by nature's guidance that men were drawn together into communities, it was in the hope of safeguarding their possessions that they sought the protection of cities." So Cicero said it. Algernon Sidney, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, I've only ever read it, don't know anybody named Algernon, but he said, "Property is also an appendage to liberty, and 'tis as impossible for a man to have a right to lands or goods if he has no liberty, and enjoys his life only at the pleasure of another, as it is to enjoy either when he is deprived of them." So life, liberty, and property are inseparable. And I should not be dishonest on this Locke thing. Before he said that the only purpose of government is to protect property, he kind of rolled life and liberty in and said that's part of your property. Very definitely so he could be able to make this extraordinary statement, which is in a paragraph by itself, to give it some impact,
Well, that's what the Constitution originally said, right? Property, and they changed it.
The Declaration?
Declaration, yeah.
I think that Jefferson always had pursuit of happiness in there. He got that from earlier documents. There was a document Samuel Adams wrote called The Rights of the Colonists, and eventually there was a resolution by Congress, and they had the lines in there, and there was also a document from Virginia that, of course, he would be very familiar with.